Hello, everybody, and welcome to Commodity Culture, where we break down the commodity space for both new and experienced investors. My name is Jesse Day, and before we get started, standard disclaimer: nothing here is investment advice. Do your own due diligence. And this episode is brought to you by MoneyMetals.com, the most trusted online bullion dealer and depository in the United States. Use Money Metals for purchasing, selling, or storing physical gold and silver. Hit the link in the description below to learn more and use coupon code JesseDay to get a $10 discount on your first purchase. Today's guest is the author of the legendary book about the formation of the Federal Reserve, the inner workings of the global monetary system, and much more. It's a book that's been brought up by a lot of guests on this show, The Creature from Jekyll Island. He is also the founder of Freedom Force International and Red Pill University. Mr. G. Edward Griffin, it's an honor to have you on the show.
Well, thank you, Jesse. It's my pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to have you. And as you are a first-time guest, we like to start with the origin story. So tell us about how you first sensed something was wrong with the global monetary system and the way governments work. What was your red pill moment? And how did that lead you to writing The Creature from Jekyll Island and founding Red Pill University and Freedom Force International?
Well, that's quite a thread right there from beginning to end that I don't think we have enough time to really cover it in detail. So I'll have to really condense it. I'll jump in close to the meat of the story, which is I had gone through some kind of an evolution, you might say, a rapid and vital one from my school days up to through my marriage and getting into the business world. I was climbing the corporate ladder, and I discovered that the world was not going the way I thought it was. And I discovered I had a crusader gene. I wanted to do something about it. I quit my job in the corporate world. I went off on my own. I started giving speeches and little lectures to local groups. And then I decided I was going to produce some documentary films. Okay, all of that. We finally get to the point where I decided at some point, these are very low budget documentary films, let me tell you. I decided to do one on inflation. And I didn't really know what the cause of inflation was, but I was pretty sure it wasn't what we were being told, which was that it was always the other guy's fault. You know, the farmers were making too much money. The truck drivers were making too much money. The grocery stores were making too much. Everybody was pointing their finger to somebody else. They're the ones that's causing all this inflation. And the general impression was that, well, inflation is like a natural phenomenon, like the sun comes up every morning and you can't do anything about that. Money just inflates in value. I said, I know that's not right, but so I started doing research and I put it in a banker box. I never finished the film. I'm fast forwarding, you know. And then I was asked to give a speech one day on taxes. A little old lady in tennis shoes in Pasadena had a study group on taxes. And I said, well, I think her name was Madeline. I said, Madeline, I don't know anything about taxes except that they're too high and I don't like them. So what else? And I thought, how would you like a little presentation on a hidden tax? And she said, hidden tax? Oh, well, that's it. What's that? I said, well, Madeline, you just have to retain me and I'll give you the speech and you'll find out what it is. Well, of course, I was talking about inflation, which is a hidden tax. And so I gave the speech and it was very well received. They asked, some people spoke to me after the presentation and they said, Ed, why don't you put that on the road? That's pretty interesting. And so I did. I started delivering a whole series of one-day seminars called the Crash Course on Money. It was all about the Federal Reserve. And it was very successful, very popular. I packed the house every time we did it. And then the day of reckoning came. Now we get to the interesting part. At the end of one of my presentations, there was another little old lady there, not from Pasadena. I was in the Midwest somewhere. And after my presentation, she came up to me. She said, well, Mr. Griffin, of course, I'm just a young guy. I'm in my middle 30s at this time. And she's an elderly lady. I almost came on one when she kept calling me Mr. Griffin. So, but anyway, she said, Mr. Griffin, well, after I've heard you speak, I got thinking about how vulnerable I am. My husband passed away a few years ago, and we don't have a lot of money, but whatever I got in the insurance, I put it into a small apartment unit, and I'm drawing income from that. And she said, now I'm wondering, whether I did the right thing. Should I get out of debt because I'm in debt? Or should I go into debt? Should I go into silver or gold or what have you? How can I protect myself? And I had this moment of awakening. I had no idea of what to advise her. I knew all about, at least a lot about banking and how they create money and extinguish it and interest rates and all that stuff. But she was asking me for financial advice. And I thought to myself, well, you're a fraud, Griffin. You have no idea. You're offering yourself as an expert there. And this poor lady thinks you know something about investments. And I knew nothing about it. So I decided to quit doing those presentations and get some education. I enrolled in the College for Financial Planning, which is a correspondence course. It's like a CPA designation. This was the CFP designation. And it's for professionals who become financial planners. So I didn't want to become a financial planner. That was not my goal. My goal was to learn about the real markets, the real world where people put money into investments and what are the good ones and the bad ones. So I enrolled in that and I got my certificate. I think I spent about maybe a year and a half or 2 years on it. Really studied hard, got through it okay. But I realized when I came out the other side, Jesse, that everything they were teaching was wrong, because these guys that were financial planners and the teachers in the schools and everything really had no deep understanding of the fraud that's built into the monetary system that I had learned about in studying banking and the Federal Reserve System and the effects of inflation and all that. This was only minimally touched upon in these courses. And I realized that the financial planners were being taught everything they needed to know to make the system work, not necessarily to help the investor, but to help the financial planners. I mean, they were all taught, well, I was being taught how to use funds and give advice on how about stocks and bonds and so forth, where there are commissions that are paid to the advisors. I thought, no, I get it, but that's nice to make all this money giving good advice. But hey, it's not good advice. So that's what I got this idea that somebody's got to ring the bell on this. And I thought, well, I'm the last person in the world to be writing about such a thing. I guess I better write the book because there was no book on that. So that's how it all started. You see, there's a lot of history there. I could talk all day on each of those little steps, but finally I was pushed into it. It isn't something. There was no great awakening at any one point, except at the very end of this process, that I realized that the system and the professional acceptance of the system was fraudulent. And that's when my Crusader gene really did start to vibrate. And so I decided, okay, well, I'm going to write a book. Well, as I said before, I'm the last person to ever write a book on that topic. I went through school having a good time, learning only as much as I absolutely had to get a passing grade. And I knew nothing about banking and money except after this process. And I certainly wasn't a writer. I thought I was good at I wanted to become involved in the movie industry in Hollywood. You know, as I went through school studying communications. I worked in a television station, radio station, all that stuff. So I thought I would be in communications, certainly not money and banking. So anyway, that's how it started. And I learned all the way through the process. Once I decided to write a book, Jesse, I think the total time from that point on was about 7 years. So meanwhile, I'm having to support a little family. And so I can't work constantly on the book. I've got to do other things as well. But I did spend about, well, at least 7 years writing that book, and probably another 7 in just getting up to speed to start writing the book. So it was a long drain on a major portion of my productive life. And I really didn't expect that anybody would want to read the book, except a few very curious people. And I thought, well, at least it'll be in the library, and those who want to read it will read it. I never dreamed that it would become a popular book and people would, we never advertised it, by the way, but we're going into our 50th printing now. And 50th printing, most books never make it to number 2. And this book in all of its publications in other countries as well is, I don't know what the number is, but it's sold over 1 million copies. And I'm just blown away by it. I said, well, maybe it's because the world is collapsing around us and the economy is blowing up in our faces. That probably has a little bit to do with it. So anyway, that's the story. Believe it or not, that's the short version.
Excellent. Yeah, and I think the book resonates with a lot of people who sense something is wrong with the way the monetary system is set up, the financial system, and the economy is operated. And I think that's why people turn to it. And I want to bring up something from The Creature from Jekyll Island. And as you outline in that book, in 1913, a subcommittee of the House Committee on Currency and Banking completed an investigation into the concentration of financial power in the U.S. and came to the following conclusion. This is a quote from them. The committee is satisfied from the proof submitted that there is an established and well-defined identity and community of interest between a few leaders of finance, which has resulted in great and rapidly growing concentration of the control of money and credit in the hands of these few men. So that was all the way back in 1913. Is this still the case today? Has the situation gotten better or worse? And are the same group of men or their families still involved in this concentration of wealth?
Well, the short answer to that one is yes, 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 and yes in all the areas where we don't want it to happen. Same group of people. These are the international bankers. They're not just, by the way, these are not really bankers. They control the banking industry, so we tend to call them bankers. But they're financial moguls, I guess you would call them. They're into investing and banking, and they make money. They're into politics. Because they lend money. They got the power to lend money, to create money out of literally nothing, and then lend it at interest. We just stop and think about that for a minute. This is what banking is all about. They create money, I said, out of nothing. It's even worse than that. They create it out of debt. And it's not their money. When they lend you money, that's not their money they're lending. They've created it in most cases, by 90%, 80 to 90% of it it may be based on a little bit of money, but it's amplified and expanded. 80 to 90% or more now of the money that you borrow from a bank never existed until you borrow it. They just create it based on your IOU. And then they charge interest on the money that they created out of nothing. It's not a bad scam, you know? So yeah, these are the guys that invented all that. And it goes way back before the Federal Reserve System. It goes all the way back to the Bank of England. And before that, it's historic. As the goldsmiths and the jewelers and so forth of the ancient times gradually learned how to bilk the public and charge interest on nothing, literally. And it's a great business model, you might say. And it took centuries to develop. By the time the Bank of England was created, they had pretty well perfected it. And that was done through the Rothschild banking dynasty, which by that time was global in nature. And then it was time to bring it to the United States. And they did. They just copied the system that they had in Europe. And they went to great lengths, as you know, you've read the book, went to great lengths to conceal the fact that they were copying the European system, because they knew that the American voters and the politicians in Congress didn't want to be copycats of something from England or from Europe. This was America. We're different, you know? And so they were copying the exact system, but they wanted to make it look different. So they didn't use any of those words. They just called it the Federal Reserve System. There was nothing federal about it. There were no reserves. And it's not even a bank. They call it Federal Reserve Bank. It's not a bank. Those were all deceptive words. So yeah, that's how it all evolved. So the answer is yes, it's the same group. And they are bilking the public. I call it plunder, legalized plunder, because they're charging interest on something which costs them nothing or very little, just the overhead. In fact, it doesn't even cost them the overhead now, because when they created the Federal Reserve System in 1913, they wrote into the law that the federal government would they would make money for the federal government to loan to the federal government based on the IOUs, and the cost of doing it, the whole operation, would be covered by the interest that they charged on the loans. And the Federal Reserve Act had the agreement that any interest that they paid to the federal government in excess of their expenses would be returned to them. So it made it sound like, oh, how wonderful these guys are. Well, that means that the whole scam, the whole operation, the cabal, as you might call it, or the cartel, which is its proper name, has passed on its operating expenses to the taxpayers. So it's a crooked operation, and even the cost of the operation is passed on to the taxpayers. So it's legalized plunder is what it is. And I don't mince my words. If somebody's going to, they say, Ed, you're speaking pretty bluntly, you're going to get into trouble. Well, heck, ladies and gentlemen, we are in trouble already. And we're not going to get into any more trouble than we already are. We're losing our country. We're losing our liberty. We're losing our sovereignty. We're losing our independence. We're all going to wind up as slaves if we don't stop this thing.
And you also point out in the book how bank bailouts are not really an emergency measure. They're actually part of how the financial system is designed. So talk to us about that. And are there any parallels you could draw to the recent bailouts? Some are calling it a bailout. The media is saying, was it really a bailout? I think it was, of Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank earlier this year.
Well, yes, it was part of the design, Jesse, from the very beginning, the way they structured this Federal Reserve Act, which, by the way, they designed that and discussed it on Jekyll Island, a private meeting that they held at this privately owned island called Jekyll Island in Georgia. And they discussed during that meeting at great length, well, how would this whole thing work? And it was clear that they were talking at two levels. A part of the time they discussed how it would work for them. And the other part of the time they would discuss how they would conceal that fact, how they would describe it to the public and to the politicians so that the scam part of it would not be evident. And it would appear as though it was right for the interests of the American people. And of course, it's, if you have wordsmanship and have maybe a couple of attorneys on your payroll, you can make any evil thing sound like it was really for your own good. And that's what they did. And so, yeah, part of the discussion was that they knew that this system would eventually be very, very costly and it wouldn't work. It wouldn't work for the purposes as it was described, which was, they said, this will stabilize the economy. This will preserve the purchasing power for the American public. They knew it wouldn't do that. These people were smart. It was their profession. They knew that better than anybody. I had to figure it out, but they already knew it. And so they had to conceal that fact. And they said, well, when it happens, we've got to pass the losses. The losses within the banking industry are going to be huge, but we have to pass them on to the taxpayer. Because if we won't be able to handle the losses, because we'll be bankrupt if we are stuck to be responsible for our own losses. So they designed the system so that it could be passed on to the taxpayer in a form which we now call bailouts or bail-ins or subsidies. We have a lot of different names, and it takes slightly different forms depending on the popular flavor of the time, the political flavor. And they're talking about bail-ins now. We're talking about negative interest rates. All these things are variations on the general concept that the losses are being absorbed by the public and not by the banks who are engineering the losses for their own benefit. So, yeah, that's really what it was all about, still is. And now, of course, we're coming to the end of that track. And I don't know quite what lies at the very end. At the end of a railroad track, there's always some kind of a bumper. And so if there's a runaway car, it hits the bumper, it doesn't go off the rails. Well, we're coming to the point where we're looking for the bumper because we're coming to the end of the track right now. And and they're going to be huge losses. I mean, so much greater losses than anything we have ever seen. Not only that we have seen, but the world has ever seen, because we've expanded this balloon, this economic balloon, bigger and bigger and bigger than ever before, ever seen in history. And when it pops, it's going to be a very big pop. And I'm sorry to say, millions, if not hundreds of millions of people are going to be devastated by it, all the way from just to be wiped out economically. And for the most part, they'll be thrown at the mercy of their other, what's the word? Their torturers, their victim, their enemy. The people that have done this to them will now be turned to and they'll say, we'll help you. Yeah, the system is terrible. Now we have a central bank digital currency. That'll be the salvation. And the people who are on the streets struggling and starving, they'll say, oh, thank you. Give us the central bank digital currencies. That'll help us. Thank you. Oh, I'm so glad you're there to help us. And that's how the scam works. And it makes me sick and angry. So that's maybe not the kind of answer you wanted, but that's where it's going in layman's terms, not in bankers' terms, because they'll make it look and sound like they're doing a good thing.
Absolutely. And I do want to pull on that thread regarding central bank digital currencies. This is something that a lot of governments around the world are developing at the moment. A lot of other people I've spoken to also echo your sentiments that they're going to use a coming crisis to then offer a CBDC as a lifeline, as, hey, look, we're going to restore the wealth that you lost. We're going to credit your account with some of these new government CBDC. Everything's going to be fine. The IMF is talking about issuing some kind of global central bank digital currency. So I'm just wondering, from your perspective, how close are we to the actual launch of a central bank digital currency? Especially globally, that seems like it would be difficult to pull off. Do you think they'll be capable of doing something like that?
Well, let's start backwards. If we don't stop them, they're quite capable of doing it because they own the system. They own the system. They run everything from top to bottom. So, of course, they can do it because they have the power of law behind them. And they'll say, you will do it. You will turn in all your dollars and exchange them for central bank digital currencies. And you will do it or you will go to prison. So, yeah, they can do it. They have the power to do it. And if we don't stop them, you bet they're going to do it, which maybe we'll talk about the imperative of not just saying, my goodness, I wonder what's going to happen next. We better get involved. This affects us. It's our war. It's our lives, our future. And we have to stop this thing. Anyway, that's another issue. Yeah, they're quite capable of doing it. And you described it very well. They created the problem. Now they're offering the solution to the problem they created. And unfortunately, the uninformed public, which for the most part still is that's most of them, they'll think, oh, how nice it is that we got these nice political and banking leaders who are going to save us. And they're the ones that are pushing us under the water.
And we do see time and time again institutions and groups who are claiming, as you said, to be taking action towards the greater good. It's just happened again and again throughout history, but they're actually looking to benefit themselves at the expense of the general public. And yet, the general public, in many ways, although people are waking up, I believe, to some extent, but most people prefer mindless entertainment to actually learning about the important factors that shape their very lives. I used to be one of those people. In fact, it took the pandemic to wake me up and to start looking around and questioning, I'm from Canada, what is my government actually doing? And that led me deeper down the rabbit hole towards your work and to learning about sound money and gold and silver. But my question is, you mentioned we need to take action. So I know you're making efforts to do this, but how can your average citizen do something about this? Is it a matter of making sure you have some physical gold and silver to protect yourself? What would you recommend that people do?
I'll have to think about that just for a second, because the average person asked that question. What can the average person do? We're up against this megalithic thing. They control the money. They control the educational system, the government, the courts, the police, the armies. I mean, you name it, the medical system. What can the average person do? And unfortunately, my answer is nothing. Because the average person, first of all, doesn't want to do anything about it. They don't want to be responsible for it. They want the government or somebody else to solve this problem. They want to be able to just go to the polls once every 2 or 4 years and vote for somebody. They think if they just vote, who are you going to vote for? That's their That's the totality of what they're going to do about this. They don't want to learn about it. They don't want to hear about it. It's too distressing. They don't have the stomach to stand up for their own rights. They don't like controversy. They want to be loved by everybody. So the average person can do nothing. If we want to change this thing, we want to do something about it, we've got to stop being average. That's the point. We have to stop being average, because the average will just go along with, well, who's going to win the election? And whoever wins this battle, they'll say, I was for you all along. It's always that way. So now let's talk about how we become unaverage. And that means we do have to learn about these things. It is our responsibility. Our monetary system is in our hands. It's always been in our hands. But we've just been so happy to turn it over to the bankers and to the politicians, because it's made to seem so complex and boring. We don't understand this thing. Let's let the experts take care of it. No, it's the same thing in the medical profession. Think, oh, well, we'll just leave that to the experts, the doctors and the researchers and so on. I don't understand it. Whatever they say, I'll do. No, 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 and no again. This is the problem with freedom. If you want to have freedom, you have to be responsible for your own freedom. You can't just let others take care of it for you, because if you do, they will take care of it for you, and you'll wind up being totally controlled by them. So what do you do about it? Well, you stop being average, which means you start learning about these things, and then you start to grapple with the problem that you can't act alone. It is true that one person alone can't do very much, hardly anything, but you can join with another person, and the two of you can join with two more. I've learned over the years that there's a kind of a magical mathematical progression here of squaring. If you have two people working on a political objective in your hometown, two people can accomplish as much as, two people can accomplish as much as four people working separately on the same project, but they're not cooperating. They don't have the same method. They don't share. They don't travel together. They don't show up at a meeting two instead of one, and so forth. So two people can accomplish as much as four independently. Three can accomplish as much as 9, and 4 as much as 16, and so forth. And you get to the point where only a small group, 30 people, 40 people squared, you can match and defeat that many people or more working independently. The secret to overcoming our problem is recognizing that the battlefield is in what they call the power centers of society. Those are the groupings, the meetings, where people have meetings and they have leaders. We're talking about political parties, talking about labor unions, talking about school systems and local county boards of supervisors and all these things. Where the power levers reside, they're always organizations, and they're always controlled by just a small number of people. And so I've looked at the study guides and the training manuals that have been published by people who know about these things. And I'm talking about communists and fascists and Nazis. These people are experts on this. They know how to do this. Those of us who are the victim and the target, we're not interested in that. We're average. We say, oh, those people are crazy. We don't like them. We don't want to read their stuff, And so we're easy marks for these people. I've read those books. I know how they do it. And of course, we can object to their ethics and their goals, but sometimes their strategies are brilliant. They understand human nature. They understand that groups are always led by a few people at the top, and most people want to be average and don't want to get involved in selecting who their leaders are going to be. They just say, who are you going to vote for? Who's on the list? And you pick one. They never think about the responsibility of putting somebody on the list. They just want to see who is selected by somebody else and then choose one. All of this is background to answer to your question. We are building right now, Jesse, a movement that reverses that process with good people, good ethics, not controlling other people, not slavery, not deception, but freedom and transparency. We're building a movement from the ground up right now that uses that part of the strategy to become influential to where the power levers are, which are in the groups or what they call the power centers of society. And to that goal, we've created something called Red Pill University. And of course, it's not a university in the traditional sense. It's we don't have any brick and mortar buildings and teachers and classrooms and that stuff, but it's a grouping of people that in one locality, like at a county level, who perhaps only 20 or 30 people who really understand. They're not average. They're not average people. They are out there to make a difference in the world and in their community, especially. And they go to public meetings. They monitor everything. They field their own candidates. They call in on talk shows. They write letters to the editor. They run for office, and they show up and talk to those people who are in positions of authority, and they convince them that if we get behind them, they will be successful. And if we oppose them, they might not be so successful. And we're building a movement in that way, and it's going to work. I'm seeing it work right now. So I didn't mean to get off on that, but I want to emphasize before we get off the program that I'm sure that there are a lot of people in your audience that might be really interested in what I just said, because many of us have gone through the period of where, oh, this is terrible. Oh, that's terrible. Oh, this is worse than I thought. And we come to the point like, hey, I've learned enough. I've got to do something about this. So when people get to that stage, now they're lost. Unless they want to build from the ground up themselves, like I've had to do, sort of on my own. But for people like that, if there's anybody interested, I would like to start off by inviting them to send off for a free booklet that I just recently published based on one of my favorite topics, which is called collectivism versus individualism. It's the ideology, the political ideology that's behind freedom and slavery in the modern age. Collectivism and individualism are really the only two political points of view in the Western world. You can have communism, fascism, socialism, Nazism, all these things, New Dealism, progressivism, all these things they're meaningless. They're just variants of this thing called collectivism. And until we understand that, we don't know what we're fighting for. So I put all this together in a 50-page booklet, and it's on the internet. It's called The Chasm, The Great Divide, between collectivism and individualism. And anybody who wants to get a free download of that booklet, and then that'll lead to how you can, if you want to, participate in creating a campus of Red Pill University in your local community, where we can start to put teeth. These are boots on the ground, teeth into this movement. Then we'll send that to you too. So if anybody wants that, I hope you write it down on your notebook some places. The URL is a little strange. It's Chasm, CHASM. So it's chasm.realityzone.com. Chasm.realityzone.com. And when you go to that site, you can see where you can order that and get a free download of the booklet. I urge people to do that because I imagine in your audience, Jesse, I'll bet half at least of your people that follow you are ready to do something about it. They know what the problem is now. Now, what are we going to do about it?
That is such a great answer. Do not be average. I will put a link in the description below to the Chasm so people can take a look at that and definitely agree. I'm sure there are people watching who want to take action. Now, before I do let you go, I have to ask you about...
let me show a picture of this book that I'm talking about. Yeah, this is it. And so that's it. It's 50 pages right now, and I'm putting some images in it to make it a little more interesting. Right now, it's mostly just text. But anyway, it's well worth it. I recommend it.
Well, I would like to discuss gold and silver briefly with you here, and I want to start by touching on this quote from the creature from Jekyll Island. It says, "As long as the dollar remains in high esteem as a trade currency, America can continue to spend more than it earns. But when the day arrives, as it certainly must, when the dollar tumbles and foreigners no longer want it, the free ride will be over." So we're starting to see some signs of this. We're seeing the BRICS nations and their desire to move away from the dollar for trade. There's rumors swirling that potentially they will eventually have a gold-backed currency. Do you think there will be a return to a gold standard at some point when the current system fails? And how important do you think it is for individuals to have their hands on physical gold and silver?
Well, it's very important. Let's again start from the back end. It's very important to have physical possession of gold and silver and other items of tangible value, because when uh, when the wheels come off of the wagon, and they're coming off now, they're really wobbling. They're coming off, and the wagon doesn't roll anymore. How are people going to conduct any semblance of economic transaction? How will you buy anything if you don't even have money? The central bank digital currency will not be money, will not be ours. We'll only have what they give us. And if they don't like us, they won't give us any. We won't have any money. People like you and me and a lot of your listeners, we just won't have any government money because they want us to starve to death. And that's how they'll do it. They just deny us the power to have anything we can use as money. Well, if we have silver coin or a warehouse full of cheap white wine or whatever, something we can trade that's of tangible value, then there's some hope. So it's important to have money that, and things like cigarettes has always been used as money, and anything that has value, bags of sugar, flour, bread. If you're growing things in your backyard and you got an extra couple of ears of corn, it's money when you need money the most. And we saw how valuable a couple of rolls of toilet paper became. And when the so-called pandemic broke out, people were just clamoring, "Oh, you got a roll of toilet paper? How many rolls you got? I'll give you a car for 5 rolls." Funny, but not really. But yes, I think everybody should have something like silver, or preferably silver, because it's a smaller denomination. It can be used for normal transactions, whereas 1 ounce of gold is a huge value. If you bought a loaf of bread and had to pay a whole ounce of gold for it, you'd be in bad shape. So yeah, now your first question is, are we going to get to that point? And my answer again is that depends on us. If we're just observers and we're asking that question and just, I wonder how it's going to all turn out. Is it going to happen? And that's all we do. The answer is, oh yes, it will happen, because there's nothing to stop it from happening. There's that saying, we are the ones that we've been waiting for to come and save us. If we don't want these things to happen, we have to become movers and shakers ourselves. We can't just see who to vote for and hope that they will solve this problem for us. As long as we do that, and you made that quote, I've forgotten that was in the book, but it was very, very poignant. As long as we accept those dollars and don't do anything to change the system, it will happen. And then once it happens, it's nothing you can do. There are a lot of analogies in that field. I don't want to sound too negative or grim, but this is a grim situation we're in. I hear people say, yeah, they're not going to take away my guns, Second Amendment, we got to defend ourselves. And boy, if they ever come to my door, they'll be surprised, I keep thinking to myself, buddy, why do you wait for them to come to your door? Act now. Don't wait until it's over, because when they show up, they'll probably have 50 people out there with automatic weapons, and you're standing there with your 45 Colt, or they're coming with a drone overhead and dropping bombs on your house. Yeah, sure, you waited until they showed up at your door. No, don't wait. Do whatever you're going to do. And I'm not talking about becoming violent. I'm not talking about getting in the streets and starting shooting up things. I'm talking about taking action, political action, getting into these power centers that I'm talking about, and getting people that you know and trust elected into positions in your county board of supervisors, your city hall, and so forth. And then you can build up toward Congress and so forth. And then globally, this is a global war. But you've got to start at the bottom. You don't start at the top. So those are the answers. It's going to happen unless we stop it. So let's talk about how we stop it.
Wonderful. Very well said. And the final question I have is, do you think if they launch a CBDC, obviously we're hoping this doesn't occur, people need to take action to stop it, but that is just another extension of fiat money. So a lot of people are pointing to the fact that eventually that will fail as well. And what I'm wondering is there a point that comes when countries are going to be forced to back their currency with gold or silver as sound money?
And again, that depends on us. Um, the reason I'm hesitating is because I know from past experience, not just in our American experience, but historically, when tyrannical governments are beginning to fall apart, they have to go through the motions and create the appearance that they've suddenly seen the light. And they're going to issue some new currency. But they have to convince the gum-chewing public that, well, they've seen the light and this new currency is going to be better. And they'll say, look, it's going to have a basket of currencies, and part of that basket is going to be gold or silver. Yes, it's going to be partially backed by gold and silver. We hear those words, oh, good, they've seen the light. No, they haven't seen the light. They're just playing us as suckers because they know we're going to say, we finally found some good people. And they will back it a little bit by gold or silver for a while in order to get us on board. And once everybody's on board and the new currency is issued, we take away the backing and we're back to where we were before. It's a trick. As long as it's the same people, the same cabal, the same politicians, and the same bankers who got us into this mess, they're never going to get us out of this mess. They'll lie to us, and they'll do all kinds of tricks. They may even send SWAT teams to our door to shut us up, but they're not going to solve our problem. We have to replace those people.
Well, Mr. G. Edward Griffin, it has been a fantastic conversation. I think people are going to get a ton out of this. I'm going to put a link, as you mentioned before, to the Red Pill University and your work, The Chasm. And I hear you're also working on a new book, so very excited about that. And thank you so much for joining us on the show and sharing your knowledge with the audience.
Well, thank you, Jesse. I'm glad that you're not an average person, and I'm pretty sure that there are very few average people listening to you right at the moment. So I'm glad to be talking to my own clan.
And thank you for joining us today on Commodity Culture. As a reminder, this episode was sponsored by moneymetals.com. Use coupon code JesseDay to get $10 off your first order. Link is in the description below, and I'll see you guys on the next episode. Commodity Culture is a series on commodities and natural resources. If you would like to see more, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you're always up to date with the latest episodes.